coming through a rough couple of weeks here at St. Jude's, particularly if you've been friendly with or know the people who have passed away in our community. It'll be our fourth funeral in the past several months here for this community, starting with Dusty Wilkins, Marcus Hewitt, Bill Weber, and today we'll memorialize Braxton Pierce. And it's hard to sometimes get around that, especially when there's so many so quickly. Such a small church. We're not a mega church for this to be expected just because of odds and numbers. And so sometimes we might ask, is this fair in life? Do we get what's fair in life? Where's God in this? Why is this happening to us? And that's what our gospel story is about today, in one sense. Our understanding of fairness and God's understanding of fairness, and how they are not necessarily the same thing, and how we should never assume that our understanding of it is at all close to what God is. Yesterday I was on the phone with someone who just happened to call here, I believe, in a great amount of distress, very upset. Spent several hours either talking with this person on the phone and then meeting with them to try to help them, thinking that they weren't deserving of God's love for a number of reasons. Things they had done to themselves and in their own life, but also things that had been thrust upon them by others. And you know what that can be like when you're with someone. And it was a very upsetting day for particularly that person, but also for me. So when I read this thing about fairness, which is actually the word grace, what we're talking about today is God's grace. A term that I think we all know and can say a lot, but it has such deep meaning that I think sometimes we forget exactly what it is. One of the simplest definitions for grace is something that's undeserved but given anyway. And it's usually reserved for God. God's grace. And we may say grace in a meal, and we may think we bestow grace on somebody else, but really it's a divine thing. Grace is. But before we get too much farther into that, let's just review the gospel story today, because it's actually one that unless you read it yourself, you might not hear too much in church. If you go to a church that follows this lectionary we keep talking about, because it doesn't show up in the lectionary. And it doesn't show up for some sinister means, I don't believe. It's just that you can't read every single page and every story of every gospel throughout this 3-year cycle that this lectionary covers, and some things get left out. And this was one of them that got left out. Matter of fact, the lectionary said read the passage that's before this, which we didn't read today, so you'll have to go back and read that on your own. It won't even tell you what it is. So we've read this one, but it's all about grace. So we have these workers that sort of are standing around waiting to be hired for the day, and some get hired early in the morning and go to work. More workers are needed, so the landowner goes to the place where people gather to find work and finds some more, does this again at the 6 o'clock hour, the 9 o'clock hour, the 12 o'clock hour, the 3 o'clock hour, and the 5 o'clock hour. And when it comes time to pay these people, he starts paying the ones who came last and really only worked for an hour, from 5 to 6, a whole day's wage. And so the ones that have been there all day, basically working for 12 hours, 6 to 6, think, well, they should get more, right? But they don't. They get the same amount. We know this story, right? And then they grumble and complain, well, we've been out here for basically 12 hours in this hot, so working in a vineyard is not easy. We should get a lot more. But the landowner's answer, of course, is, but this is what was agreed to. You agreed to this. You got exactly what we agreed to. Now notice, if you remember, the other workers didn't agree to a wage, specific wage. They just agreed to whatever the landowner thought would be right. And they trusted. And they got the same thing. And so our human sense of fairness says, well, that's probably not right. What if I was the one that went out at 6 and worked to 6 to 6 in the sun, pulling grapes off thorny vines? Wouldn't I expect to get a little bit more, a little extra reward at the end if someone else got the same thing I agreed harder and longer, I should get a little more. Right? Our sense of fairness versus God's sense of fairness. So we don't really bestow grace upon people. We want to be fair and just. And so we have human concepts of fairness and justice. God is so far above that. It's at the level of grace. And that's why I think we have sometimes it's hard for us to really grasp the full meaning of grace. So I think we anchor it in fairness and justice. Our sense of that. But if we look at it from the point of view of the workers who came late, perhaps I'm assuming they also had families. Wives, husbands, partners, children, mothers, brothers, sisters. They probably came from a household that they're trying to help support by earning money. Now, when it says, I wish it wasn't translated this way anymore, that they were standing idly by, in my mind anyway, that could be translated sort of lazy. Right? He was just lazy, didn't want to work, was idle. That's not what it means at all. They're standing there all day waiting to get hired. In fact, when they're asked, why aren't you working? No one's come to hire us. Yet we've been standing here all day hoping to get hired. So, how would you like to be the person that was hired at 5 o'clock, knowing you have a family of 4, 5, 6, 10 that you're helping to support? And you get, they say this daily wage, the denarius might be about $50. So say you only get 5. You wanted to work all day, you have all, you're trying to support the same number of people. In the community, your friends know these other workers, it's a big extended community, but you come home and say, well, we're not all going to be able to eat tonight because I only make $5. Then how would you feel if one of the other workers looked at it, who gets to eat in that household? Well, he should have been picked first. Not that he should have worked harder. He should have been picked first. Something he had no control over. It's sort of like people that come to church the longest seem to think they might have more of a right to say what's going on in church. God says, no, everyone has a right once you come here, professively and participate. The last will be first, and the first will be last. Everyone's actually equal in God's eyes. And the old vineyard story is a nice story from the past, it seems. But we do this all the time in life, in our daily lives. We're sort of jealous of people who seem to get more than we do, and that we should deserve it. I have a personal story I'll tell on this one. I have a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends in life. We became best friends later in life. I was probably in my early 30s. He was probably in his late 20s. We went through a lot together. We sort of bonded real fast. And I was going deeper and deeper into debt in this part of life. I was going back to school. My big career was over, so I was working these harder and harder jobs for less and less money. And then Steve, also, who was trying to do good in life, came from a wealthy family. And so his father gave him $50,000 probably to help buy his first apartment in Washington, D.C., where things are very expensive. And I just thought that was the most unfair thing ever. I'm working 3 jobs, and I can barely rent, a 1-bedroom or not even 1 bedroom. It was what do they call it? Efficiency apartment. I call it my hat box with a balcony. Tiny apartment, had a little balcony that overlooked the parking garage with the parking lot that was about this wide. You could stand on it. I just thought that was the most unfair thing ever. Suddenly, he just handed money. Here I'm trying to work 3 jobs just to pay for this efficiency apartment. And it was the first time I really remember feeling really bad about feeling that way about my friend. That I stopped totally doing that. And I catch myself when I do that now. Why wasn't I happy for Steve? Why wasn't I happy that he was getting ahead in life? I was getting ahead in life. I was doing what I wanted. I was going back to school. This, career that I used to have, which was actually a horrible career when I look back on it. It just lasted a long time. I was beginning to enter into seminary, which eventually brought me here, where I want to be. So everything I wanted from life getting something more than I was getting. Steve's mother had died a few years earlier from cancer. He was actually getting part of his inheritance from his father, who was a big banker. Steve had just gotten off using a lot of drugs and really trying to turn his life around. So why couldn't I be happy for Steve in that sense? See, it's different when you try to look at it from their point of view. So what if he got an apartment? I mean, actually, it was an efficiency just like mine. He just bought this. I mean, that's not even what I wanted. So why would I get sad? That's human nature sometimes, though. It's not human nature necessarily to see ourselves in other people's situations, to bring these gospel stories back together. Always what Jesus was trying to do. See the other person as you see yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. You know, it's a great story of two twin boys that would come to church, and the preacher would see them. They were like 8 years old or something, and see them. They were so perfectly identical twins. You know, they dressed alike, looked exactly alike, moved alike. If someone shifted, the other one shifted, and they would always like look at each other with this deep intensity. And so the preacher finally asked him one day, what do you see when you look into your brother's face? And the other one said, I see my face. Wouldn't it be neat if when we looked into other people's faces, we saw our face? We could try to understand a little better instead of seeing people different, or getting things that they don't deserve, but I do. And that's what is called the scandal of grace. You know, it's not that God's justice or fairness wasn't being achieved in this story. It's the idea that human fairness and justice wasn't being achieved in these stories, all the stories, most of the gospel stories. John MacArthur, who was a great preacher who just died earlier this year, had a ministry called Grace to You out in California, said this about this story. The charge of unfairness was not grounded in a love for justice, but in the selfish assumption that the extra pay they wanted was the pay they deserved. Do you hear that? It was something that they wanted, they actually thought they deserved, even though they had contracted for something different. Only because they saw somebody else getting not more than they did, but just the same. And that made them selfish. We can't really understand the concept of grace, I don't think, without also going back to this reading from Paul. You know, all except I think one letter of Paul. I have to look it up. I only know this. All but one letter of Paul both begins and ends with a greeting of grace. And most of the letters are about grace. And grace of God be with you. That's how he opens most of his letters, and the grace of God be with you all. That's how he closes most of his letters. Something like that. It's very important to him. And the reason is because grace isn't something we just get and then we should sit down with and say, okay, I'm saved now. God saved me. Grace is an active thing. We should live in a state of grace, is the term. Live in a state of grace. Be so thankful for this free gift given to us, grace, that our whole lives change. Our entire lives are turned around and around and around and around. Like he opened his letter this morning, Paul. Live your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, striving side by side with one mind for the faith of the gospel, and are in no way intimidated by your opponents. You know, he also writes to the Philippians earlier in the same letter. He says, this is my prayer to you, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best, and may be pure and blameless until the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus